I did. I could do it. Okay. Welcome, everybody. So usually in this class, we've been discussing bitachon, we've been discussing the spheres. I've kind of just been thinking about what we are present to. And because Shavuos is what is most present to all of us right now, I figured we would give a share on Shavuos and kind of explain a little bit about what Shavuos is about. So first and foremost, I want to give credit where this is due. This is based on a talk from the Rebbe, and I heard it from Shais Taub with, slight additions and subtractions, but it's important to give credit where it is due. So Shavuos. Shavuos is made up of the words Shin, Beis, Ayin, and Saf. And an interesting dynamic in actually the name is the fact that Shavuos has 4 names, and those 4 names are the acronyms of Shavuos. So Shin is Shavuos, Beis is the Yom Tov of Bikurim, Ayin is Atzeret, it's the Yom Tov of stopping, and Taf is the Yom Tov of Torah. It's the actual holiday. It's the holiday in which we have received the Torah. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev asked a very interesting question. He said, you look at all the 4 different names of Shavuos, and 3 of them make a lot of sense. Shavuos, it means weeks. We've been counting 7 weeks. It makes a lot of sense that at a culmination of counting 7 weeks, we could call this Yom Tov the name of Shavuos. Beis, Bikurim, we're actually bringing our Bikurim. It makes sense to call it the Yom Tov of Bikurim. Taf, we're receiving the Torah. That is the theme of the entire Yom Tov. It makes a lot of sense for Torah to be a part of one of the names. Ayin is the one that's stumping us. Atzeret. What does Atzeret have to do with Shavuos? What does Atzeret actually mean? And why is it contributing to the Yom Tov that we know, the Yom Tov of Shavuos? Most of the Yom Tovim have some sort of mitzvah, right? So Pesach has matzah, Sukkot has the esrog, the lulav, Rosh Hashanah, exactly. On Shavuos, we have cheesecake. Where's the mitzvah in that? Like, why is that the theme of Shavuos? Why is that symbolic of what Shavuos is? It's a very interesting concept. Why doesn't it have its own mitzvah? Another question from all the Shalosh Regalim, Shavuos looks very different. Sukkot and Pesach both have 7 days. They have the 8 days, but they have the Chol HaMoed. They have those interim days. And Shavuos is just, at least in Eretz Yisrael, it's 1 day. Why is this one of the Shalosh Regalim very different from the other 2? Why doesn't it have that full set of days to celebrate that Yom Tov, right? The Yom Tov for Shalosh Regalim. Imagine everybody's coming up. The whole point was everybody's supposed to come up to Yerushalayim, and they come up for 1 day, as opposed to Pesach and Shavuos, where they're coming for, it's like a week of festivities. So all 3 of these questions are answered in just one question, one answer. When we look at what the theme of Shavuos is, the theme behind Shavuos is Bacharta Mikol Ha'amim. We were chosen from all the other nations. God decided to choose us to be the ones to receive His gift, His presence, and His present, the Torah. Why were we chosen? Why were we chosen over all the other nations? What is it about us that made us unique and special? And how is that reflected in the actual Yom Tov of Shavuos? If you look at every single Yom Tov, starting even from Rosh Hashanah, right? We look at throughout the entire year. Rosh Hashanah is the Yom Tov of God coronating Himself as our King, and therefore there is a relationship. He is our King, we are His nation, so there's a relationship. It continues into Sukkot, where God protected us. So we're experiencing that level of Him sequestering us away and protecting us from our enemies. There's something very special and unique about that aspect of our relationship. And it continues into Pesach, where Hashem redeemed us and He took us out of Mitzrayim. And there was Him being our Savior. There's that part of our relationship. And we finally lead up to the very end of the year, we look at Shavous, and Shavous is not about what Hashem is doing for us or what we're gaining from this relationship. On Shavous, we're looking at the relationship itself. It's literally a celebration of our connection, the us, and we at the same time chose him. And that's what we're celebrating. It's not about him saving us. It's not about him crowning himself and us crowning him, which could be more external aspects of the relationship. Here, this is a unique relationship that is us two devoting ourselves to one another, showing that we are inextricably intertwined. We are bound to one another, and what we're looking at and celebrating on Shavuos is the relationship. So by looking at it through this lens of Shavuos being the actual relationship, all those different answers are basically answered, right? So why is the name Shavuos Atzeret? What does Atzeret, stopping, have to do with Shavuos? Because on Shavuos, we're stopping and we're looking at God. We're not looking at what he's giving to us, what we're giving to him, what our interchanges, the tit for tat. We're looking at the actual relationship. And that takes stopping and giving space to look at it, to examine it from all different angles. What does this mean to me? What does it mean that I'm inextricably intertwined with God? What does it mean that I'm bound up with him? It also answers the question of why isn't there a special mitzvah on Shavuos, right? A special mitzvah on the other Yom Tovim shows like, okay, so the Pesach was because we were redeemed, the Matzah was because we were redeemed. The Lulav and Esrog are symbolic for the different types of relationships we could have with ourselves, of the Torah. On Shavuos, it's not about something external. It's not about a theme. It's about it, the actual relationship. It's about our connection and leaning into our connection. And the last question that we were talking about, which was, why isn't there a Chol Hamoed? Why isn't there a 7-day Shavuos? Gets a little bit more esoteric, but if you look at the number 7, 7 very much links into the 7 midas. 7 different ways that God relates to the world, 7 different ways that God creates the world, his attributes. Shavuos is not about his attributes. Shavuos is not about his external way of interacting with us, that external means of connecting with us. Shavuos is about our connection. It's the relationship. It's not what he did. It's not what he does. It's about us. And so therefore, it's a 1-day opportunity. It's just that one theme of looking at our relationship instead of the 7. It's depending on the 1. So I want to share with you just a quick story that kind of brings this as a more relevant theme into our life. There was once a young boy, he was 15 years old. I just heard this, again, giving credit where it's due. I listened to a podcast with my kids called Deher for Kids, and it shares Rebbe stories. It's beautiful. So the latest podcast story was the story about Daniel, who grew up in New York in Tufshin Yud, 1950. His father passed away when he was 15 years old. And if that wasn't devastating enough, all the financial responsibility of the entire family fell on him at 15 years old. So he had to go out to work, leave school, go out to work to provide for his mother and his sisters and his family. And it was a huge struggle. It was very hard for him, first of all, to get over the death of his father, who was his pillar, the foundation of his family. And now he had to step into it. There was no time for him to recover from it. One Shavous, he was walking to shul thinking about how, this was the route he used to take with his father. And he was remembering his father. It was very hard for him. And he remembered that his father always used to greet every single Yid that he saw with a warm Good Shabbos. So he decided, I'm going to be like my father, and I'm going to still do that, even though I'm feeling completely lost. And he greeted every single person, Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos. And he sees a Hasidic-looking Yid, so he was wearing more of a garb, the Hasidic garb. And he says to him, Good Shabbos. And the man, instead of just saying Good Shabbos and walking on, the man said, Good Shabbos, how was your week? And it stopped him. They were passing each other, and suddenly he stopped. And this man looked eagerly and wanted to know how was his week, this 15-year-old boy. And for some reason, he just felt so connected to this person, or at least this person was being present enough that was willing to hear from him, this boy who so deeply wanted to connect with a father figure. He told him, I'm having a really hard time. I'm very lonely. I'm struggling. And the man listened to him. It was, a 2-minute interchange, and they wished each other good Shabbos again, and they left. The next Shabbos, he's continuing again to say good Shabbos, and again, he meets the same man. And again, he asked him, how was your week? How are you doing this week? And he started looking forward to this brief exchange that he would have with this man every single Shabbos. Fast forward a few months or so, and his friend tells him one day, he said, you have to come. There's this gathering. We have to go to this Farbringen. It's a Hasidic Farbringen. You have to come. And he's like, we're not Lubavitch. Like, I don't know. Why would I go to Farbringen? He said, just come. So these two boys, 15, 16-year-olds, go to this Farbringen. And at this Farbringen, they're going to be making the Rebbe the Rebbe. It was like this really cool Farbringen that now they're coronating this Rebbe the Rebbe. And so this boy, this 15-year-old Daniel, is looking, around, and he's trying to find his place. And he tries to get a better view. He wants to see who this new Rebbe is going to be. And he recognizes his Hasidic man that he saw every single Shabbos. And to him, the impact was incredible, because it was not just any man. This man was a man who was going to become a Rebbe. Like, now this person who deeply cared about me, who I feel so connected to, is now a Rebbe. It brought the relationship to a whole different level. And it made him feel so much more empowered that someone like this would look at him as worthy enough to stop in the middle of the street and genuinely ask after his welfare. So I think what's so beautiful about the story, without it even becoming the story of the Rebbe becoming the Rebbe, but how incredible it is that the Rebbe, before he was Rebbe, deeply cared about every single person enough. The way I look at it is deeply leaned into the aspect of, I have a neshama, this person has a neshama, we are deeply connected, we're both Yidden. Right, it doesn't matter who you are, what you're, how old you are, what your circumstances are, you're a Yid, I'm connected to you. And so much so, he brought that so much to the forefront of his energy that this boy, this 15-year-old boy who was suffering, just went right into it and connected so deeply with the stranger on the street. He didn't even know his name, but was willing and ready to open up his world to this other person, because that was the energy that the Rebbe was showing to him. Even before the Rebbe technically had to care about every single Yid. He already experienced that, coming to the relationship, seeing this whole person as a person. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but if you've ever looked into someone's eyes, and instead of looking at what they're wearing, what their body type is, what their, status quo is, any of that, just look inside their eyes and see this is a whole person. And look at them without any judgment, without anything stopping you from connecting to them, just deeply looking into them. That's the level of what I think the Rebbe was doing at that moment with that child, where it's just you. You're a neshama, you're a value, we are deeply connected. This is about our relationship. So there's some themes that come up also throughout Shavous, which are interesting to examine, kind of bring into this concept of looking at Shavous as the relationship that we have with God. Oftentimes, our relationship is put to the test when we're put into a situation that calls upon our Mesiras Nefesh, right? We all know the stories of the Mesiras Nefesh that people had when they came to America and they had to lose their job every single Shabbos. That level of Mesiras Nefesh brought to the forefront that either I'm going to choose myself and my relationship with God, or I'm going to choose Parnasa. And they gave up, financial security and all the details of, what's going to happen with their lives for that relationship with God. When you're experiencing that high intensity level of Mesiras Nefesh, then the Alter Rebbe speaks about how it brings it out of you that at our core, a Yid doesn't want to detach himself from God. He'll even give up his life for the relationship because he cannot forego that relationship. And what's really beautiful is to start looking at two levels of Mesiras Nefesh. And the one that often gets the most attention is the one that is the most dramatic. So what's the Mesiras Nefesh we usually think of? We think of the soldier who has, a bust in the park or a statue in the park or his name on a plaque, which not to downplay someone giving up their life for their country, but the soldier who dies for his country or dies for his values or dies for, what he represents is an incredible amount of Mesiras Nefesh. And that's the one we oftentimes acknowledge because it's so out there. It's so dramatic. It's so scary. And it's so brave. It's so courageous. There's another level of Mesiras Nefesh that we don't often look at. And that is the soldier who, instead of dying for his country, he's every day living for his country. He's doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing. He's training, he's serving. Every single day he is protecting. There's an incredible amount of devotion and investment every single day. Why is that not given enough credit? Because it's not that one time of giving up everything. It's the every single day giving up everything, which is a very interesting dynamic to start looking at. Like that soldier who's giving up his life every single day, he just didn't die for it yet. There's still that same incredible amount of investment of Mesiras Nefesh for that soldier. Share with you like an interesting story. During the right before the 6-Day War, a lot of Americans and Europeans, young Americans, were flying into Israel. Why? Why would you fly in when tensions are high? They were very much believing that if they came and they would fight for the country, then they would help the country survive. So they were coming from a very idealistic place. I'm going to support the country. It's in this moment of absolute trauma, and I'm going to show up for my country, for Israel. And what was so interesting was, after the 6-Day War, these incredible miracles, 6 days of absolute miracles, there was like an exodus from Israel, from Eretz Israel, where all these Americans and Europeans all that young, incredible energy was just leaving. And Golda Meir, who was in charge of foreign relations at the time, gave a speech saying something along the lines of, how come you're willing to die for your country, but you're not willing to live for your country? You're not willing to live amongst us. You're willing to die for us. You came here to die for us, literally, but you're not willing to stay and live for us, which is such a powerful question and a powerful message of the two different ways of having Mesiras Nefesh. There's dying for one's country. There's dying for God, for Mesiras Nefesh, and there's also devoting ourselves in ways that maybe we're not looking at as a true Mesiras Nefesh. Now, if you were to look at the two different soldiers and the two different types of Mesiras Nefesh, what's interesting is you could even see them within the themes of, let's say, juxtaposing Pesach and Shavous. If you look at the symbol of Pesach, what is like one of the themes of Pesach? I used to be an English teacher, and at a certain point, I was teaching Macbeth. And one of the themes of Macbeth is blood. Like where the blood comes in different scenes, it symbolizes different things. And it's funny, but Pesach also has this theme, the symbol of blood. The Yidden took the blood, they spread it over the actual doorway. This was supposed to be a sign for God to pass over their homes. Even during the actual Seder, at a certain point, we take the wine and we're pouring it as if we're pouring the blood. It's representing the different makkos. Blood is a theme throughout Pesach. The fact that the Yidden were, the salt water is supposed to represent the tears and the blood that was spilt by the Mitzrayim, by, God forbid, taking the children and hurting them. There was a lot of gory details that were happening throughout Pesach. So blood is definitely a theme throughout Pesach. If you look at Shavous, what's the liquid? What's the theme or symbol of Shavous? It's milk. It's milk. It's dairy, right? It's very interesting to take those and to kind of compare the two. What is blood? Blood is like that symbol of war and giving up your life for your country. It's aggressive. It's a very masculine energy, not in a bad way, in a good way. There's courage. There's valiant effort. There's netzach, endurance and conquest and conquering. That's like the theme of Pesach. Shavuos is a lot quieter, right? What is milk? The imagery that comes to mind is the mother who's nursing her child a whole night and staying up all night and being devoted to her child all night, that quiet devotion to that child. And at the same time, she's giving up on a lot. And it's not loud, it's not out there, it's not dramatic. It's different. It's a totally different type of Mesiras Nefesh. And looking at Shavuos, it has that theme of our quiet resolution, our quiet promise to God that we are committing ourselves to Him. Just like a mother is committing herself to her child every single night when she's nursing her child throughout the night and throughout the day, she's taking care of the children with that quiet devotion. It's not heroic. No one really knows about it. No one can see all the trials and errors and celebrate how incredible she is. But there is that same fighting for what she believes in, connecting with something that she deeply cares for, giving up on something that is hard for her. And that is the main theme of what Shavuos is. Shavuos is our commitment to God, not just to Him, but to the relationship. And it's not with fanfare, it's a quiet commitment. It's receiving the Torah and our connection to Him, but looking at it in a very deep way, not necessarily a dramatic way. The mashal that I loved that Shestab shared in this share was, it's actually a twofold mashal. So he shares in the story was he used to work for his grandfather. His grandfather worked, I don't remember what, in a warehouse. He used to work in his grandfather's warehouse. And one time his grandfather shared with him this mashal. But later on, he heard this mashal interpreted in a different way. So he shared it the first way and then the way his grandfather shared it, which I definitely loved. So the mashal is like this. A pig and a chicken are walking down the street. And they see a sign outside of a butcher shop. And on the butcher shop, the sign is the pig and the chicken are there to feed everybody else, right? And so the pig says, the chicken says, look, we're both up there. We're both giving of ourselves. We both do the same thing. And the pig says, yeah, I give up my life and you give up your eggs. There's a very big difference here, right? I'm actually getting killed and you're the one who's, you're providing eggs. Wonderful. So that's one way of looking at one type of Mesiras Nefesh, right? So the pig is giving up his entire life. There's something about termination. He fattened himself up his entire life, and then suddenly it's over, and now it's given over to whatever it is that he's feeding, okay? Now, the way that his grandfather gave over this mashal, which was an entirely different way interpreting of this mashal, so it's the same mashal, pig and chicken walking down the street, and the chicken comments to the pig, look, we're both doing the same exact thing, right? And the pig says, yeah, I give up my life. And the chicken has his own comeback, or her own comeback rather, and she says, you gave up your life one time. Every single day I create something and I give up all of my everything every single day. I created this egg, this was mine, and I give it up every single day. And at the end of my life, I give up my own life too. And I think what's so beautiful about the difference between the two of those is the two types of Mesiras Nefesh. And one's not greater than the other. But what's important is to highlight the one that we don't actually see, doesn't get enough attention, and to look at it and realize that this is also important, this is also crucial, and this is also connection. This is the theme of what Shavuos is about. It's not about us dying on Mesiras Nefesh. It's about us looking at the relationship and saying, how can I, in one small measure, have Mesiras Nefesh as well on a daily basis? So many times people will say, like, they'll make sure that we educate our children about the Holocaust, but are we educating our children about making brachos? Right? It's almost like in the brachos, that's where you're devoting yourself every single day with your words, with your intention on a daily basis that I'm connected to God. and I am giving up a part of myself, let's say the seconds that it takes, I'm starving and I want to eat. I'm giving up those seconds because I'm devoting myself to him. I'm living for him. I'm giving up that whole egg, all of myself on an everyday basis for him. Why? Because I have a relationship, because I deeply care, because we're bound to one another. So it's really interesting when you look at like the milk being a theme throughout Shavous. It's not just about the cheesecake. It's not just about because, at Har Sinai, they didn't know which kalim to use, so they used milchiks. Of course, that is what we tell our children, but there's also a much deeper underlying meaning behind milk. What is the milk? Milk is life source. Water is life source, but it's a mother's life source to her child. It's the way she provides for that child. So what is the milk of our lives? We have blood in our lives too, places where we are giving up tremendously, choosing to live somewhere, choosing to pay a huge amount, giving up on big things for our children or for Yiddishkeit. But what about the small things? Where is it that there is a deep connection and relationship with God that I show to him in small ways without the fanfare? And that's me living for God, as opposed to feeling like I'm giving up part of my life for God. It's seriousness, but it's in a different way. It's so much more valuable. It shows on so much more. I don't want to just give it up at one time. I want to constantly giving all of myself to you, God. There's this one beautiful story of a man who survived World War II, and he joined a Lubavitch yeshiva because that was the yeshiva that was taking in Bachram at the time. So he wasn't Lubavitch. He came from like a Yekish background, but he started going to Lubavitch yeshiva. At a certain point, he finally made it to New York, and he wanted to meet with the Rebbe, and he did. And then afterwards, he wanted to contribute something towards the Rebbe. He went into business already. He wanted to contribute to the Rebbe. So he was debating, how much should I give to the Rebbe? But he couldn't think of a dollar amount. So instead, he just left a blank check. He's like, the Rebbe knows me. This much I know. The Rebbe knows me. I'm deeply connected. So if I'm deeply connected to the Rebbe, he knows what I can do. He knows what I should do. And he'll put in the dollar amount. So he leaves it there. And he keeps wondering, like, what's going to happen? He checks his bank statements. He's like wondering if they're going to call him. What's going to happen? He put a blank check. 2 months later, Rabbi Chadakov calls him and says, you left this blank check, and the Rebbe wants to know if $10,000 is an okay amount for you. And at the time, $10,000 was like $100,000, like huge amounts of money. And so he's kind of like staggering on the phone, but he's bringing himself back to like what his intention was at the time of leaving this blank check. And he said, if this is what the Rebbe thinks I'm supposed to be doing, then I'm going to be doing this. And even though I'm just starting out now in business, I'm going to borrow the money, whatever it is, and I'm going to figure this out. So he tells him yes, and he hangs up the phone, and he's reeling. He's stressed. He's trying to figure out, how am I going to make this money? Who am I going to call? And he's frantically trying to figure this out to try to get. The Rebbe was saying, well, is it okay if you fill out the money, $10,000, if we can make out the check to be $10,000? So he's frantically trying to figure this out. And 5 minutes later, he gets another call from Rabbi Chadakov. And he gets on the phone, and Rabbi Chadakov says, the Rebbe has another question for you. And he's thinking, oh my goodness, what now? And Rabbi Chadakov says, the Rebbe wants to make sure that you're doing this with a full and giving and calm heart. Are you doing this because you feel at peace with this, or are you feeling like you have to? And he was thrown into this position of, what should I do? How could I answer? Because on the one hand, right now, he's feeling very stressed. And on the other hand, he thought, I really have to lean into what a Rebbe is. If the Rebbe is asking this of me, if he sees that I can do this, then I have to lean into trusting our connection right now, that he sees me, he knows me, and he's asking me right now if I feel calm, if there's real trust in the Rebbe Chassid relationship. And remember, this wasn't even a Chassid. He was like from a Yekish background, but he like knew Lubavitch. And he said, I am going to lean into the fact that this is my Rebbe. He knows me. We're deeply connected. I can trust that. If he says that I can do this, I can do this. And he experienced that sense of calm that came with the trust. And he told Rabbi Charkov, I'm doing this with a full, calm heart. And he did. He got off the phone and he made the calls and he figured it out. And he made sure to get the money into his account so that when they actually, wrote down the check, the money came through. And that technically would be the story. Like, how incredible is that story? To be able to lean into that connection, to lean into the relationship. This is our relationship. I know that I can trust this and that I could live for this. I can give all of myself for this. It's not me suffering. It's not me, cutting myself off. Who knows how long it's going to take me to recover from this financial loss. It's me living for this, leaning into that trust. But it does have, that really great ending that sometimes comes along with Rebbe stories, which was that year he made an incredible amount of money and became super successful, which probably only happened because he leans into that trust and he leans into that bitachon and said, if the Rebbe thinks I'm capable of doing this, then he became a keli for that amount of bracha, for that amount of sustenance and shafa to come into his life. But what was so beautiful to me about the story is him looking at that connection and saying, we are deeply connected and he knows what I can do and I'm going to receive that. And that's what Shavous is. Shavous is about receiving the Torah, looking at Hashem and saying, you, me, the Torah, we are all one, we are all bound together, and I can lean into that on an everyday basis. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be difficult for me. It doesn't have to be external. It's about our connection. It was very interesting. I'll just share with you a small process that happened for me this morning. I had a client and then it didn't happen. She was pushing me off. And as I'm looking at my stack of books that I could have been reading probably in that time, I was thinking, like, why is it that I'm not reading these books? Like, why is it that I'm limiting myself and I'm saying, okay, that's only for Shabbos, and that's only for the night? Why is it that I can't read a book at 11 o'clock in the morning? There's obviously something about, my belief system or how I connect to this information or learning in general that's limiting me. And when I started thinking about it, I started thinking about also like even this share, like, why is the share so important to me? Because it pushes me to learn. And it brought up this whole question of like, am I learning because I'm getting pushed to learn, or is it something that I deeply, deeply care about? Do I need that extra push, or is it something that represents to me, it's exactly this share, my relationship to God? And I could lean on how deeply I care on my relationship to God and not need to have a share in order to learn something for Shavous. And so this is just my very raw process that I'm sharing with you right now. What I'm taking away from this share is we don't have to prepare a share or have an excuse or, have children in order to make sure that we know what the parsha is in order so that we could keep in tune with our children. Like all those excuses that sometimes I know for myself that I make for myself in order to stay tuned or feel connected to God or feel connected to his Torah. That's not what it's about. Shavous is about our deep internal connection. I don't need to think that all those things are important in order to push me to be connected to God. Whether I learn Torah or not, whether I try to connect or not, there's something to lean on. I chose him, he chose me, we are inherently connected. And coming from that space of I'm inherently connected to God, of course I want to learn something on an everyday basis. And if it doesn't happen, that's okay, I'm still connected. You hear the difference? It's not like, okay, I have to quickly learn something so that I feel connected. We are connected. Lean into that connection, trust that connection. And then from there, see what comes. Yes, of course, I'll learn at 11 o'clock in the morning. It doesn't have to be at night or on Shabbos or on Shavos in order to learn something, because that's what comes out of me feeling deeply connected to you. It's not me scrambling in order to feel connected. It's I am connected, and therefore, well, let's see what comes out of it. Maybe what will come out of it is just me being more present with my child, because I know that this child is an neshama just like mine is and is deeply connected to God, and therefore I'll respect that child more. And when I want to hug him super tight and he's like, no, 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 I'll respect that because this is an neshama. So wherever it takes you, it takes you. It doesn't have to be like learning Torah is going to be the answer. But what's so beautiful about looking at Shavuos and what the theme is, it's about our relationship and leaning into the connection that's there instead of looking at all the external parts that make us feel connected. And the fact that that's a feminine trait, us having that quiet connection, is something that we as women can really lean into. It's not about the external aspects. It's about us being really internal and present with that connection, which we are pretty good at. So I want to give us all a bracha. This Shavuos, we should feel, experience that connection, that inherent value that we have because Hashem is connected to us. And we should bask in it, glorify in it, celebrate it, and see what comes up for us this year coming from that state of I am deeply connected to you, Hashem. Have a beautiful Shavuos. You're so welcome. Thank you.